Namaskar. Welcome to the lecture series organized by Pimpri Chinchwad College of Engineering and Research, Ravet, Pune. This is Samir Savarkar and we are going to discuss Structural Analysis 2, in short Essay 2. In our first lecture, I will be giving introduction to the course and we will be discussing certain prerequisites. This is the course structure. It's a 4-credit course, 100 marks examination scheme, divided as in-sem exam 30 marks and end-sem exam as 70 marks. And this is the detailed contents or syllabus of the course. We have 6 units, with Unit 1 as slope deflection method, Unit 2 as moment distribution method, Unit 3 as flexibility method, Unit 4 as stiffness method, Unit 5 finite difference method and cantilever method, portal frame method, and Unit 6 is introduction to finite element method. So let's start with the subject. What is structural analysis? A very basic question. What is this subject about? It is determination of effects of loads on structures and their members. So structural analysis is a process which derives inputs from applied mechanics concepts, material sciences concepts, certain tools, certain techniques from applied mathematics, and then the output is the structural design. Once you do the analysis and once you have the results, the report of the analysis, using the same you can lead to engineering design of structures. What is the purpose of structural analysis, or what exactly we do in the structural analysis? So first of all, assessing strength of the structure, that is determining stresses and stress resultants. Secondly, we are assessing stiffness, that is we determine slopes and deflections in the various members of the structures, in the overall structures. And finally, assessing stability, that is when there is going to be a collapse at the ultimate load, we are determining the successive equilibrium forms, or we are also assessing the vibrations, we are doing vibration analysis. However, presently in this subject we are just focused upon strength and stiffness. There are certain assumptions in structural analysis, and on the basis of these assumptions we are going to carry out our analysis. So what are such assumptions? First of all, equilibrium. The entire structure and every part thereof is completely stationary, is completely in equilibrium. Linear elasticity is another assumption, that is stress strain path or loading unloading curve is the same and inclined straight line. Compatibility, that is whatever deformations are going to take place in the structure due to loading, they will be consistent with the physical constraints, with the physical supports provided. The deformations are assumed to be small, that is when you load the structure, it retains its original design. Though it is undergoing deformation, they are very small deformations, and superposition principle is applicable. So these are our assumptions of the structural analysis. Let's see extremely important cause and consequence chain, and the student should do well to remember this cause and consequence chain. So let's say we have some structure. For example, I have shown cantilever beam and then it is loaded. When I say loaded, I am also showing the support reactions, because equilibrium implies that there will be action and simultaneously there will be reaction. So the cantilever beam is loaded by actions from slab and reactions from column. So the chain starts with loading of structure. Loading leads to deformations in the structure. The deformations lead to development of stresses. So just to illustrate, I have shown arbitrary section position, and let's say that at that section we have hogging shape of the cantilever beam, and then tension is at the top, compression is at the bottom. So it has all started with loads leading to deformation, deformations leading to formation or development of stresses, and then stresses lead to stress resultant. For example, in my drawing I have shown how the upper portion tensile force and lower portion compressive force are forming a couple, giving rise to bending moment M. And then this bending moment, this internal resisting moment will oppose the action of external loads, the effect of external loads. So I repeat, loads leading to deformations, leading to stresses, leading to stress resultants, leading to resistance to the loads. So that is how the cause and consequence chain in general takes place in any structure. Let's see what is degree of static indeterminacy. What do we mean by indeterminacy? If we are not able to determine, we call it is indeterminate. So for example, I have shown several beams: simply supported beam, overhanging beam, cantilever beam. So those three are actually determinate beams. And in the second row we have a continuous beam or a propped cantilever or a fixed beam. Those three are indeterminate beams. So what do we mean by indeterminate beam? In a beam, when you cannot determine the support reactions, external support reactions, because number of unknown reactions is greater than number of available equilibrium equations, you simply call it indeterminate. And how to find this degree of static indeterminacy? So that is what we have written here. Degree of static indeterminacy external is R minus 3, where R is number of support reactions and 3 is number of equilibrium equations. Sigma fx equal to 0, sigma fy equal to 0, and sigma m equal to 0 are our equations of equilibrium. Now here I have written or R minus 2 because we are aware that in case of beams usually axial forces and horizontal loading is ignored. In such case you can ignore sigma fx equal to 0 equation. So either you may remember R minus 3 in generalized form or R minus 2 in the modified form, degree of external indeterminacy, static indeterminacy external. And as far as internal indeterminacy is concerned, the beams are always determinate. By internal determinacy, we simply mean that we are able to find axial force, bending moment and shear force, that is stress resultants, we are able to always determine in case of beams once the support reactions are found. Next we are observing certain frames. Frames are usually highly indeterminate, and how do we define degree of indeterminacy in a frame? So we calculate degree of static indeterminacy external as R minus 3. R is the number of unknown support reactions and 3 is the number of available equilibrium equations. And degree of static indeterminacy internal, it is written as 3 multiplied by C, where C is the number of closed loops in a frame. So you are observing in my first row there are no such frames where closed loops have been formed. So these frames are internally determinate. Externally they may be indeterminate, but internally they are determinate. Whereas if you see this frame, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 closed loops are there. So when 6 closed loops are there, 6 into 3, that is its degree of internal indeterminacy is very high, that is 18. This 3 number represents actually the 3 stress resultants: axial force, bending moment and shear force. What is degree of kinematic indeterminacy? So it is essentially degree of or degrees of freedom at nodes. Now, what do we understand by nodes? They are either supports or they are joints or they are free ends. That is what we define as nodes. Now for supports, degree of freedom can be ascertained, can be determined using compatibility conditions. For example, when you have a fixed support, degree of freedom is 0, because a fixed support will not allow any translation nor rotation. When you have a hinge support, it will allow only one rotation but will not allow two translations. So degree of freedom is 1. If you have a roller support, degree of freedom is 2, because it will allow one translation and one rotation but will not allow the normal translation. So on and so forth. So from the support conditions we are able to calculate degree of freedom at supports. When you come to a joint, a rigid joint between a beam and column, let us say, theoretically each rigid joint has 3 degrees of freedom, 2 translations in the plane of that member and 1 rotation about an axis perpendicular to that plane, clockwise or anti-clockwise. So in general, a rigid joint has 3 degrees of freedom, delta x, delta y and theta z. But if we go ahead assuming such a large number of degrees of freedom or such a large number of kinematic indeterminacy, the analysis is going to be very complex, very much involved. So there is some assumption or there is some simplification made. Assuming beams and columns of the frame to be inextensible, that is they are not changing their length at all, certain simplification in analysis is possible. So what we are assuming, I am trying to show here graphically. Suppose this is your frame ABCD with fixed supports at A and D, and it is laterally loaded, so that this is how the deformed shape is approximately. Now what we are assuming here, each rigid joint has independent rotation theta z. That means B has turned through theta B, C has turned through theta C, and theta B and theta C are independent. They have no bearing over each other. They are not necessarily equal also. However, assuming columns of the frame to be inextensible, delta y is 0 for B point as well as C point. So what did we discuss in our earlier slide, that actually B should have delta x, delta y and theta B. C also should have delta x, delta y and theta C. But that is amounting to a very large number of degrees of freedom. So our assumption is that columns are not undergoing shortening or extension. So you are observing that B is moving to B prime or C is moving to C prime at the same horizontal level. That means the height of the column is remaining same even though the frame has undergone a small swaying. Because of this assumption, first of all, B and C are not having any delta y, any vertical displacement. Then our next assumption is that even beam BC is not changing its length. That means it is our assumption that B prime C prime length, the deformed length, is same as BC length, the original straight length. Because of that, what has happened? B to B prime distance and C to C prime distance are same delta x I am showing for B point also and C point also. So these two assumptions, that columns and beams are inextensible, considerably reduce our efforts, considerably reduce our mathematical complexities of solving this problem. So now what has happened? B has only theta B and delta x, C has only theta C and same delta x. So actually degrees of freedom for the entire frame is hardly 3, theta B, theta C and delta x. Obviously at A point and D point, since the supports are fixed, there is neither any translation nor any rotation. Okay, now we are coming to certain standard results, standard formulae that we have seen in our earlier course, that is Structural Analysis 1, and this is the table where you are seeing a few cases. This is cantilever beam subjected to concentrated couple moment, subjected to point load, uniformly distributed load, and then we have what is the slope, what is the deflection, what is the bending moment. All these results have been tabulated here, and I will of course not read all these results, but students have to learn these results by heart. Then we have certain fixed end moments formulae. For example, this is a fixed end beam with point load, concentrated load acting at the center. Then fixed end moments are going to be PL by 8. If the load is eccentric and not exactly at mid span, then there are certain expressions. If it's a UDL over entire span and if it's a UDL over partial span, then what are going to be the expressions for fixed end moments? That is what is tabulated here. And in the second column we have what is called as propped cantilever, fixed end at one end and a roller support at the other end, and then fixed end moments have been tabulated, have been expressed. So again students will have to learn this complete table by heart, then and then only you will be able to apply the advanced methods of structural analysis too comfortably. Cause-consequence correspondence is also something that we discussed in Structural Analysis 1. When you think of force as a cause, then the consequence at the point of action of that force is a translational effect, that is deflection. That means you are not to relate, you are not to connect force applied to rotation, because rotation is caused by couple moment, translation is caused by force. So whenever you think of a force, you think of deflection. On the other hand, whenever you think of deflection, at its point of deflection, you should think of force acting. Similarly, when you think of a couple moment, a concentrated couple moment, then rather than looking for the deflection or amount of translation, you should be looking for rotation at that point of action of couple moment, or you should define slope at the point of action of couple moment. So this cause and consequence relation you should do well to keep in mind. You think of force, you think of deflection, you think of couple moment, you think of slope. Then we have moment slope relationship. So yet another standard result I am showing here, and it is very much possible to prove this standard result using either Moore's theorems or conjugate beam method or even the elegant energy method. So what do we have here? In the drawing we are seeing that this is a beam with hinge support at one end, that means partial fixity is there, rotation is possible, and fixed support at the other end. And now if I wish to give a rotation of theta, if I wish to give a rotation of theta at the hinged end, at the left side end of the beam, then the amount of torque the amount of couple moment that I require to produce this theta is given by m is equal to 4 EI upon L multiplied by the angle in radians, that is theta. This E is the modulus of elasticity of the beam material, I is the second moment of area, what is called as moment of inertia sometimes, of the beam cross section, and L, as you are observing, is the total span of the beam. EI is called as flexural rigidity of the beam. So what do we have here? To produce a rotation of theta in the near end of the beam, when the far end is fixed, the amount of moment required is 4 EI upon L into theta. It can also be proved that the corresponding moment generated, the reactory moment generated at the far end, is exactly half of this applied moment. That is, it is going to be 2 EI upon L into theta. This was 4 EI upon L into theta. Half of that will be 2 EI upon L into theta. As I said, all this can be actually derived, and we have seen this, we have proved this in structural analysis 1. Using equilibrium, it is possible to arrive at this result also, that the reaction here is going to be 6 EI upon L square into theta, and of course equal and opposite corresponding vertical reaction here, 6 EI upon L square into theta. So I repeat the entire result again, because this we are going to require frequently in almost every unit, in almost every numerical of structural analysis 2. Near end rotation is theta, far end is fixed, then the moment required is 4 EI upon L into theta. Moment generated at the far end is 2 EI upon L into theta. The reaction generated at the near end as well as at the far end is 6 EI upon L square into theta, and these directions can be easily decided using concepts of equilibrium. Yet another standard result, force displacement relationship. So let's see what do we have here. This is a beam, and one fixed end of the beam has been translated, has got displaced linearly through an amount of delta. This you can frequently observe happening in case of sinking of supports. When you think of a river bridge, you know that the soil during rainy seasons will soak a lot of water. The river is flooded and the soil has a lot of water content, because of which there is a change in its volume, and then you will observe that the abutments are getting lifted up because of that tremendous soil pressure, soil plus water pressure I should say. So these things happen to the structures, and the structures, particularly the columns and the joints, have to be designed taking into account all these contingencies. So coming back to our standard result, if one support is linearly getting translated through an amount of delta, then the reaction, see what is happening, I am thinking of translation, so I am focusing essentially upon the vertical force reaction, and it can be proved that it is 12 EI upon L cube into delta. That is exactly what I have written at the other end also. You may say that this right end has gone up by delta, or you may say that left end is sinking through an amount of delta, sinking down relative to the right end, and then the vertical corresponding reaction, force reaction, is 12 EI upon L cube into delta. Of course, equilibrium tells us that the same upwards reaction will be generated at the other support, and again using equilibrium concepts, it is possible to find out that the moment generated here at the fixed left end is 6 EI upon L square into delta, and of course the same moment generated at the right end, 6 EI upon L square into delta. So I repeat again this standard result, force displacement relationship when one end sinks down or is lifted up relative to the other end, but there is no rotation at the joints are fixed and the amount of relative displacement is delta, then the vertical reactions generated at the two supports are 12 EI upon L cube into delta each, and the fixed end moments or the reactory moments generated at both the supports are 6 EI upon L square into delta. What did we see in structural analysis 1? It will be worthwhile revising because that is what is going to take us to structural analysis 2. We have seen double integration method, and in that additionally we saw Macaulay's technique to find slope and deflections in a beam. Then we saw Mohr's area moment theorems. There were two theorems. One gave us difference in slopes and the other gave us intercept on a reference axis. Then we saw conjugate beam method. Then we saw Clapeyron's three moments theorem. All these methods are particularly useful when we come to a beam. Then we have seen elegant energy method, that is Castigliano's first theorem and Castigliano's second theorem, which was more efficient, not only applicable to beams but also applicable to simple frames. Here I am making one small note that these methods, however efficient and interesting they are applicable to very simple and determinate structures or structures with small degree of indeterminacy. So these methods are simple methods of hand calculation which you can use provided the complexity of problem is small. And then what we are going to see in structural analysis 2, we are seeing elegant methods or advanced methods which can be used to analyze complex structures with large degree of indeterminacy. Now since in exam you are doing hand calculations using scientific calculators, we are not going for degree of indeterminacy larger than 3 because we can solve only 3 simultaneous equations in your calculator, but these methods are actually applicable for a very large number of degree of indeterminacy. So they are very efficient methods, they are very elegant methods. And in addition to these methods, we are also going to see certain numerical techniques which fetch approximate results, not accurate results, but acceptable approximate results when we come across complex structures, complex portal frames. So this is a broad overview of contents of structural analysis 2, that we are going to see certain elegant and efficient methods to analyze complex structures with degree of indeterminacy maximum 3. These methods will fetch or will yield accurate results, and then certain methods which are yielding approximate results, and they are numerical techniques, they are approximate techniques to analyze complex portal frames. So thank you very much to all of you, all the very best wishes. See you in my next lecture, and from next lecture onwards I am going to take help of the chalk and board pedagogy or methodology of lectures, of discussion. So all the very best wishes, and thank you very much once again.